If you like my audiobook, please click like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Your Sky, My Sky was published in 2003 in Taiwan. It was a highly autobiographical novel that delicately describes the protagonist's hesitation about living in a foreign country and the confusion about gay relationships after he left Taiwan and first arrived in Canada. 20 years after the publication of this book, it will be released as an audiobook in 2024, representing the story of 30 years ago, in an era when there were no mobile phones and an underdeveloped internet. It is the story of a young gay man's affection and loneliness in a foreign land during his youth. The imprint was so profound, solid, and not virtual at all. As the author, An Yeu, he wrote in the postscript for the audiobook version, he pointed out the value of story spreading. Here, to our youth, especially those who lived with laughter and tears. Your Sky, My Sky. Chapter 1. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the mountain town of Taichung was still covered in fog. Danny and April worked together to help me carry 2 large boxes of luggage downstairs. Danny shoved the luggage into the trunk and started his little silver car. It was cold, and the engine trembled feebly in the early October chill. Rubbing my eyes after a sleepless night, my heart was shaking violently. This journey will take me to Vancouver, Canada, thousands of miles away, and an uncertain road lay before me. When I think about the new world with different cultures and language backgrounds, the future is uncertain and unknown, and my heart feels even heavier. After all, it's me who was determined to fly. No matter the difficulties in the future, there was no way out. These 2 large boxes of luggage will accompany me to a foreign country in the future. Maybe 1 year or 2. Maybe 10 or 20 years. I feel really unsure. This was not my first time going abroad, but this time I plan to stay abroad for a long time. On this trip, only 2 friends, Danny and April, were seeing me off, and I actually felt a little sad in my heart. I knew that when friends were separated, they eventually would meet again, not to mention that technology and communication means were so developed today. What really saddened me was the sadness of facing homelessness. Just 2 months ago, I ended an embarrassing relationship. The man with whom I had been in love for 2 years also succumbed to family pressure and was about to marry a woman he had only met twice. I was not a sloppy person. When it was time to leave, I would no longer miss him. Unexpectedly, his future wife came to my house and caused a farce of snatching the husband. This incident was like a bomb detonated, causing quite a stir in my family. The lack of understanding from my family, plus my own mental weakness, forced me to hide alone in Danny and April's home in Taichung, like a wounded animal hiding in the dark, licking the rotten wound in my heart alone. Although Danny and April treated me like family, it was not my home after all, and I couldn't really feel released. After feeling healed and trying to avoid the contemptuous eyes of my family when they looked at me, I thought there was no other way but to go far away and exile myself to the end of the world. On this long trip, I hastily decided to go in a hurry, not caring that my wounds were still aching, and not giving myself a chance to regret it. 1 week before leaving, I returned to Taipei and told my family about my decision. It didn't matter to them whether I said it or not. If I do say it, it's just an "oh," as if I'm just going to Thailand for vacation. I'm going to Canada. Oh, when are you leaving? I'll be there for a long time. Then, have a nice trip. Facing such embarrassment like this, I was heartbroken. It's not that I insisted on wandering, I was exiled from here. After I checked in my ticket at the airport counter and followed Danny and April upstairs, the airport was crowded and noisy, and the tour groups came in waves like waves. We were squeezed into chairs in the corner, and the three of us had to sit on the chairs in a daze.
Are you afraid that you will be alone from now on?
April broke the dullness and said jokingly. I smiled bitterly. How could I not be afraid? In fact, I was scared to death. After all, I didn't know what kind of story would happen on this journey, and I didn't know what kind of writing my future life would be like. We could only take one step at a time. After all, I no longer had a home here, so I should be surviving anywhere. Taiwan was one day, Canada was also one day, and in the future, even in every different place or country, the sun would rise and set the same way. The airport announcement had called out my flight number. It was time to leave. Even if I wanted to stay a little longer, no matter how late I was, it would only be a matter of a few minutes.
Taking good care of yourself, wandering requires a healthy body.
Danny nagged again and again before leaving. I nodded, but deep down in my heart, I shouted loudly. I'm not merely going to wander. I'm looking for a place of my own, a home where I can belong. It wasn't until I passed through the customs and was sitting alone in the boarding room that my tears really burst out. For this trip, no one ever told me, if your life abroad is not so good, please come back. But no, it seemed like everyone thought that I should live in a foreign land for the rest of my life, and all I wanted was a family I could rely on. It seemed that I no longer belonged here. At this point in my life, I was like a kite with its string cut off. It departed from the place where I was raised for over 20 years and would sail alone across the ocean towards the end of the world. Maybe one day, I could take root in a certain place. Maybe I was destined to wander for the rest of my life. A bet on this future, I am not sure at all. It's already the fourth day since I arrived in Canada. There was a misty drizzle this morning, and the temperature was already nearly freezing. The northern country, disseminated in late autumn, exudes a sense of desolation. Because I was temporarily staying with a friend introduced by Phil, I didn't want to bother him for too long, and I just wanted to find an apartment as soon as possible so I could move out. In addition, I had to open a bank account, report to school, and run some errands. I couldn't care less about this kind of gloomy weather, so I took the SkyTrain from Burnaby to downtown Vancouver alone. Royal Bank of Canada was the largest bank here. It's not difficult to open a bank account. The lady at the desk took my passport and US dollar money order very kindly and asked me if I needed to open a US dollar account as well at the same time. I thought for a while. I don't plan to stay here for a long time anyway. Instead of converting all the US dollars I had into Canadian dollars, I might as well open a US dollar account and then exchange it into Canadian dollars when I needed to. Therefore, I would not lose money in the money exchange process back and forth. Therefore, I asked this lady to open 2 accounts for me. The procedure of opening the bank accounts was settled in an hour, and I looked at the notepad in hand. The next step was to find the school. Walking out of the bank and crossing 2 streets, I almost found the school immediately. It turned out that the so-called school was located in the downtown area, a bit like an English cram school in Taipei. The municipal library was right across the street from the school, which was very convenient. Because I held a student visa, according to regulations, I must report to the school within a week. The so-called registration actually just gave me a small test, which was not too difficult. The school then used this test to classify students into classes. At the same time, a beautiful Caucasian teacher chatted with me to test my English speaking ability. When she asked me where I lived, I told her that I hadn't found a place yet. My budget was very tight. For an ordinary apartment at present, 1 bedroom and 1 living room without furniture would cost about 500 to 600 Canadian dollars a month, not including the utility bill. I needed to find somewhere cheaper to live. She told me that some students lived in a homestay. They provided 2 meals a day, and the cost was about the same as renting an apartment. Otherwise, it would be much cheaper to share the apartment with other students. I was kind of a loner by nature, and it was a bit tiring for me to live with a family of strangers. Besides, I was new here and didn't know anyone. Whom could I share the apartment with? When I tried to tell her in my broken English, she thought for a while and then told me in a series of rapid English that there was a way. I tried all my English listening skills, but I was still confused. It sounded like she suggested that I could go to the Vancouver General Hospital and ask if there might be a place to stay there. Did I hear that correctly? Hospital? I asked again, and she nodded seriously. And she was very helpful in telling me how to get there by bus. Not only I was so confused, but I was too embarrassed to ask further questions. Anyway, I thought, despite what she said, the hospital was a hospital. Anything could happen in this foreign country. That would not be odd. Maybe it was because Canada's social welfare was so good that even hospitals could take in homeless people. Maybe it could even provide 3 meals a day. Then I'd appreciate it. I was happy thinking about it, but I didn't know that because of my broken English, it would end up causing a big joke later on. Early in the morning, I hurriedly followed the instructions of the Caucasian teacher, took the SkyTrain, changed to a bus, and arrived at the Vancouver General Hospital, not far from the city. This hospital was really big, with 5 or 6 buildings on 12th Street. I didn't know which building I needed to go to, so I randomly asked someone on the street and was directed to the registration and information desk. In front of the registration desk, I asked a lady at the counter. She probably thought I was going to see a doctor, so she asked me to get a number ticket and gave me a thick stack of forms to fill out. Seeing the thick stack of forms in my hand, with a group of foreign English ants crawling on the papers, I really wanted to cry. Using all the words I knew, I tried to tell her that I was not here to see a doctor, but to find a house to rent. The lady stared at me with a very strange look and kept saying in a good-natured manner, "This is a hospital." I shook my head. "Me see no doctor. Look rent house." Teacher tell me. Here. The poor lady looked at me blankly. not knowing what I was talking about. I thought she was going crazy because of me. If I didn't leave, she might take me to the psychiatry department for mental treatment. I reluctantly thanked the good-natured lady, returned the large stack of forms to her, and then shuffled out of the hospital door. I felt extremely discouraged. When I went outside of the hospital, I wearily sat down on the steps outside the door. I lit up a cigarette and smoked it alone. All of a sudden, I was so flustered that I didn't know what to do next. Just before I finished a cigarette, a young doctor wearing a white robe suddenly walked out of the hospital front gate. He looked tall and somehow handsome. I saw him standing outside the door looking around. He walked straight towards me when he saw me sitting on the corner of the steps. It turned out that he was a resident doctor here, and he just heard that good-tempered young lady told everyone that a crazy Oriental was looking for a house there. See? I was right. She thought I was a lunatic. He kindly told me I should try to go to the high-rise old building on the corner, just right across the street. It turned out that the high-rise building was the hospital's dormitory. It was originally only provided for doctors and nurses to live in. However, because most doctors and nurses did not want to live in the dormitory, only some people from out of town still lived there. In order to reduce the waste of resources, the hospital decided to open it to some students from out of town or international students for rent. Only then did the truth come to light. It turned out that the lady at the registration desk was just a regular staff, not a doctor or nurse, and had no idea this was happening. Fortunately, this handsome and kind-hearted resident doctor informed me immediately, allowing me to find a cheap and lively place to live, which also created a wonderful life for me in Vancouver. The kind-hearted, handsome guy, his name was Larry, and later on, it was also because of him that I decided to leave Canada. This morning, it was my moving day today, because most of my stuff was still inside my luggage, and there was nothing special to pack. I simply pulled the 2 large pieces of luggage into the living room. Phil's friend saw that I had sorted it out, so he brought over a piece of paper and needed to settle the payment with me. Settle payments? That's right. The airport pickup fee and accommodation fee for another 6 days totaled $360 Canadian. He also emphasized that it was very cheap and there was a discount after being referred by a friend. I was stunned for a moment, remembering that Phil had told me that this house did not belong to him. He was just a tenant. What kind of accommodation fee did he charge? There was a Chinese old saying called Jiang Taigong fishes, and those who wished to take the bait. Phil from Seattle was a good friend of mine. I heard from Phil that he was indirectly introduced to this man by another friend. Then, this bill should be paid, who asked me to find a friend of a friend of a friend to help pick me up at the airport for no reason. This was business, not friendship. The so-called compatriot love probably was not that common these days. Fortunately, Larry, the doctor friend I just met, agreed to drive over after getting off work to help me move my luggage. Otherwise, I would probably have to pay another moving fee. Maybe that guy was a little embarrassed. After collecting the money, he stayed in his room and didn't even see him coming out when I left. Seeing that it was almost time, I simply pulled my luggage to the front porch and smoked a cigarette while waiting for Larry to arrive. Almost right after I finished my 3rd cigarette, Larry's little red car just pulled up the driveway in front of the house. Good Larry, He carried my 2 large suitcases into the car in a few seconds, and I got into the car without even going back inside to say goodbye. Seeing this, Larry followed and got into the car without any further hesitation. Probably because my face was so long, he asked after the car started on the road.
"What's wrong? Is there something bothering you?"
I told him everything what happened today. He burst out laughing after hearing this.
"Haha, I should charge you this moving fee."
Indeed, life should really be interesting like this. Those who are entrusted by friends will be charged according to the market price. Those who meet by chance will be willing to pay. This life was really interesting. We arrived at the dormitory in no time. After I completed the formalities downstairs in the office, I received my room key. Then Larry and I took the elevator to the 7th floor, where we got a very special room number, 777. Larry smiled and said,
"Wow. Lucky 7.
"You are my lucky star," I said. It's my first time in this country, and we met by chance. Who can say I'm not lucky to receive such a favor? I should find time to buy Larry a nice dinner, I planned in my mind. There was almost everything necessary in this dormitory. The room had a single bed, desk, wardrobe, small refrigerator, and a small wash basin. The public bathroom and toilet were at the end of the corridor, and the kitchen and TV entertainment room were on opposite sides of the hallway from my room. The rule here was that you must pay half a year's rent at a time, totaling 780 Canadian dollars. The rent included water and electricity bills. Also, I could apply for my own phone line. This dormitory really saved a lot of money compared to renting an apartment out there. Larry also lived in this dormitory for a while. Like a landlord, he led me around to learn about the environment. I was also told that the students living here were either college students from other places who came to Vancouver to study, or they were international students like me. No wonder I saw people of all kinds along the way while we toured around. It's just like a small United Nations. Wow, the days to come will be exciting, I thought. Today was a weekend, so I decided to walk around the dormitory alone to get to know the surrounding environment. Speaking of which, the location of the dormitory was really ideal. It was only a 5-minute walk from the Safeway supermarket. There was a shopping mall above the supermarket. On the east side of the shopping mall, across the road was the city hall. Therefore, many bus routes went into the downtown, and I could take the bus to school from here. The neighborhood here was very quiet. There were tall red maple trees planted on both sides of the road. It was late autumn now, and the fiery red maple leaves were gradually withering. The ground was covered with falling yellow leaves. They would rustle when walking on them. After moving into the dormitory, I realized that I still lacked some stuff. Fortunately, this shopping mall almost had everything, including food, clothing, and daily necessities. I bought a cooking pot, a few dishes, and a set of sheets and pillows, but comforters were not needed. There was heating in the dormitory, so the thick quilt I brought from Taiwan was sufficient. I just got these things, almost costing me over 200 Canadian dollars, which was frightening. It was not easy to go abroad for me. Also, I didn't bring much money with me, so I had to be extra careful and not waste any money. Here, if I wanted to eat out, I would have to spend probably 5 or 6 Canadian dollars at every meal. so it was more practical to cook everyday meals by myself. Besides, the supermarkets here had everything, and I could even buy Oriental foods such as Napa cabbage, ginger, soy sauce, and even instant noodles. I heard that Vancouver's Chinatown was very big, and I thought I would definitely go there one day and enjoyed it. As a result, I bought a lot of vegetables and a small box of beef and planned to cook a pot of beef and vegetable soup with noodles to eat tonight. It is the most economical and hassle-free to cook this kind of pot. Cooking a large pot can last for about a week. However, after eating one pot, I cooked another pot for the sake of saving money. It ended up that I ate this pot for almost half a year. That caused me, even till today when I saw the red color borscht soup, that would make me sick to my stomach. In the evening, it started to rain again. Autumn was nearly over, and the maple red leaves that had been burning for a season have gradually faded in the rain and fog. The towering red forests on both sides of the road downstairs were now becoming monotonous dead branches. The winter was coming. Looking out from the large window of my room, I could see the brilliant and shining lights of the Vancouver skyline and the seaport from the distance. This blurred beauty often made me sit on the windowsill in a daze all night, looking out at the night view from the window of my room. Sometimes I would think about my wandering life, but most of the time, I just didn't think about anything at all, so that I could have a blank space in my mind. It's rainy and foggy tonight, and the lights of the Vancouver harbor from the distance were soaked in the fog and rain, and all the yellowish colors had melted into the fog. The cold wind carried the raindrops, creating a spinning and erratic feeling, as if the whole world was immersed in a dense fairyland. Facing this situation in a foreign land, I felt unsatisfied and in a trance. The feeling of not knowing that I was just a guest in the dream suddenly came to my mind. Was this just a youth's dream of going abroad? Or I was deeply afraid that I would wake up from the dream and find out that I was still lying on the bed in the small house in Taichung. It was misty and rainy tonight, and I felt a little bit of loneliness bubbling up in my heart. The school would start tomorrow. Cheer up, everything should be okay, I told myself before going to sleep. It's another weekend. I was shocked by 2 fire alarms in the dormitory. One time was in the evening when I was watching a news program in the TV room with a group of Canadian students. Suddenly, the fire alarm set off so loudly that I almost jumped up from the sofa immediately. But looking at this group of Canadian students, they didn't react to the fire alarm at all. I hurriedly asked, "What's going on?" "Fire alarm." The person who spoke had no expression on his face, and his eyes were still staring at the TV. "Why don't you run away then? Shouldn't we supposed to evacuate?" "It's okay. This happened often, and you would get used to it in the future." I saw they were still sitting there and showed no sign of leaving. I had no choice but to quickly stride towards the escape stairwell. I was in a hurry to go downstairs, but suddenly I remembered something. So I rushed back to the room, stuffed my passport and bank deposit book into my pocket, and then ran downstairs. The escape stairwell was filled with people from all floors, and everyone was evacuated to the ground floor. I was on the 7th floor, and the escape stairwell was not very crowded at first. Unexpectedly, the closer we got to the downstairs, the more people there were. Later, we simply jammed on the 3rd floor and stopped moving further down. The fire alarm bell continued to scream, and I heard the emergency siren of the fire truck approaching downstairs outside, but I was trapped on the 3rd floor. At that moment, I felt really scared. In this situation, my calling to the heavens and the gods has no response. Oh my God, I have never done anything bad in my life. Why should I die in a foreign land like this? It seemed like a century before I finally reached the 1st floor and saw the front gate. My heart just dropped from a height of thousands of feet to the ground, and I shouted in my heart, "I am safe now." After I calmed down a bit, I just realized that something wasn't right. A large group of people gathered outside by the front gate, everyone chatting and laughing. It seemed that no one looked sad or frightened, but it seemed like a party was being held. What is going on? It turns out that this was just an additional entertainment bonus by living in this dormitory, because there were often some careless students who forgot their cooking. The fact that the TV room was next to the public kitchen, so sometimes the students often forgot about the pot was still on the stove while watching TV. There's another worse situation even. If you were not good at cooking and the food got burned and caused smoke. I said it because the fire detectors in the kitchen were super sensitive. The fire alarm system of the entire building will sound off if the smoke concentration exceeds that about of 3 cigarettes. Everyone in the building was asked to evacuate downstairs and waited for the firefighters to arrive. Residents could only return to their rooms once it has been determined to be a false alarm by the fire department. I heard that this kind of plot happens several times a month. No wonder these students were already immune from it. Only a newbie like myself would be completely terrified. Sure enough, at 2 o'clock in the middle of the night, the fire alarm set off again. I had no choice but to crawl out of the warm bed, rubbed my sleepy eyes, and walked downstairs. 2 false fire alarms in one night were really enough. School courses were becoming more and more interesting. The students came from all over the world in our class. Han, Cody, and I were from Taiwan, Shirley was from Hong Kong, Narita was from Japan, Jesus was from Mexico, Anita came from Switzerland, both Thibaut and Rudolph were from France, and Michelle was from Spain. Just by looking at the group of people arranged by the school, I could predict how exciting this season's study will be. This kind of language class was no longer about memorizing textbooks, vocabulary, and grammar. Teachers believed that English was a part of life, not a rigid classroom teaching. So we watched movies, listened to songs, played charades in the classroom, and each introduced his or her country and culture. Of course, classes were not limited to classrooms. We went to coffee shops, department stores, churches, museums, parks. As long as there was an English-speaking corner of life, we were there. I love this class so much. The tutor in our class, Sandy, was that beautiful Caucasian teacher who gave me the verbal exam on the day I registered. She was tall and had long blonde hair hanging over her shoulders, and her slightly rosy cheeks were just like the color of an apple. I thought she was very suitable to be an advertising model. When every time Sandy took her class on an outing, there would always be some romantic encounters. Some men would often come to strike up a conversation with Sandy, and some of them did look very handsome. Later, this matter became a game of guess who gets it among classmates to see who would get Sandy's attention today, and the person who guessed correctly would buy the coffee for the whole class. Unfortunately, I had bought the coffee for the whole class 5 times already. Oh well, it's just that I was too sensitive to this kind of stuff, I guessed. The way Sandy's teaching was also very special. The school had provided textbooks to students, but she chose not to use them. Books were the homework for students to work on at home. The class time was precious, and Sandy wanted to train students to be able to express themselves. The memorizing textbook, that kind of work, was the effort when students went home at night. If we watched a movie, everyone had to give a 10-minute critique report in front of the class. If we went out on the street, Sandy would often have some crazy ideas. It could be as small as going to the street to find people and asking for directions, having to pick and choose with shop assistants when buying things. If we went to a restaurant to order food, then we had to explain how we wanted our food to be prepared, or even going to a cafe to strike up a conversation with a stranger, etc. These were no joking. It's just like going to the battlefield. One day, Sandy asked everyone to tell a joke to the class. If no one in the class laughed, they couldn't stop telling it until everyone understood it. Throughout the morning, everyone in the class was so nervous and uptight that we felt just like we were facing a war. Not only were they thinking of jokes in their heads, but they also had to listen carefully to their classmates' jokes. We couldn't let others freeze in front of the class. When it was my turn, I had already thought of an embarrassing thing that happened to me. Not long after I arrived in Vancouver, I came out of my dormitory to go to the supermarket alone. At the intersection, a group of teenagers who looked like middle school students came to me and asked me if I had some cigarettes to give them. "Sir, do you have any cigarettes?" I didn't stop and kept on walking. As a matter of fact, I was very nervous, but I kept my face looking chill, shook my head, and spontaneously said, "No, thank you." Suddenly, I heard a burst of laughter from those kids behind me. Like a sword struck behind my back, I felt that my face was turning red and hot. This joke made the whole class stagger with laughter, and even Sandy's blonde hair flew in the air with the laughter. The school had a rule that everyone could only speak English, whether in class or after class. Of course, there wouldn't be any problems for those students who didn't share the same language background. On the contrary, with those of my dear compatriots from Taiwan and Hong Kong, we had to be very careful. If we were not mindful, our fluent Mandarin would blurt out unconsciously. Especially when our English expressions are not expressive, we have to play policeman and thief game with the teachers. There was a huge break room in the school, which served a variety of tea and coffee for students. The purpose was to encourage students to practice more English in their spare time and make more friends. It just so happens that whenever we, a group of people with Chinese background, got together, we often chattered in Mandarin. Cody is a slightly chubby boy with a baby face and a sunny smile from central Taiwan. We later became good friends. Pan, a girl from Taipei. When you stood in front of her, you could almost feel her sharpness and sensitivity. Shirley from Hong Kong had a scatterbrained personality like a goofy elder sister. Han is the oldest. He was an immigrant, and he was the most familiar with this city. He also took great care of us. Whenever we were in trouble, he always came forward to support us. It seemed that no compatriots from mainland China attended this school. I heard that students from mainland China were very hardworking students. They were either at UBC, University of British Columbia, or other universities. They wouldn't come to this kind of school. I had no ambitions at all, so this kind of stress-free class was just suitable for me. To take Larry out for dinner was still an agenda in my head, but because I was so busy at the beginning of school, we had to postpone the dinner for several weeks. Today he happened to have a late shift at the hospital, so I asked him to have dinner with me. Larry took me to a restaurant in English Bay. English Bay was a very famous scenic spot in Vancouver. The bay scenery here was beautiful and moving, especially at dusk and sunset. The beautiful sunset reflected on the sea gives this place the reputation of a romantic bay. As a result, many high-class restaurants, bars, and hotels have opened along the seaside avenue. The restaurant recommended by Larry had a large floor-to-ceiling window facing the ocean with sunset. The decoration inside the restaurant was very elegant, and there was gentle classical music floating in the air. I don't think I need to look at the menu. Just by looking at this posture, I knew this meal would not be cheap. Just by thinking about it, I felt guilty immediately. After all, he had helped me so much, and by all means, he definitely deserved this delicacy. I blamed myself inwardly. Don't be stingy. I could save the money for this dinner from other places later on. During the dinner, I put all my attention to what he said with all my English listening skills and the training I had received in school these days. Therefore, I had pretty much figured out his background after the dinner. Larry came from a small mountain town in the east of British Columbia. His home was close to mountains and lakes. Even if my listening skills were not very good, I could still imagine the scene of a paradise land with mountains and lakes. When I was listening to him describe the life of a simple mountain home was utter fascination and enchantment. The lake on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, the cabin by the lake, watching the changing colors of the seasons, the croaking of the mother duck and her baby ducks foraging for food, Bambi the deer in the morning mist right in front of the house if you look around. Sometimes you would encounter wild animals like giant bears when walking in the forest. Brewed your own wine and went to the forest to cut firewood for the winter. During the winter season, everything was covered by snow, and all the eyes could see was completely white. These stories and pictures were not at all. It is a beautiful poem, and I was fascinated by it. How could you be willing to leave such a wonderful place like a fairyland? I couldn't help but feel sorry for him.
The reason I left was because of love hurt.
Cool. Pretty poetic. I stared at him without saying a word, waiting for him to continue.
When I broke up with my lover about a year ago and was looking for a change of environment, it happened that this hospital in Vancouver needed people, so I applied, and here I am.
Did you say lover? I winked mischievously. Although my English was not good, I also know that he did not use the word girlfriend, But, lover, there must be something to dig into. He laughed.
Yeah, right, I am gay.
Although I had a hunch, but when he said it so openly, I was really caught off guard and stunned for a moment. It seemed that the atmosphere in Western culture was relatively liberal, and this kind of thing could be seen under the sun. I reckoned that I had come to the right place. I grinned and laughed in my heart. Coming along in the school classes, I felt that my English had improved quite a bit. Although it was still not perfect, at least I could handle most of my daily life a lot easier than before. Our classmates from the school were very friendly. It was just like a small United Nations, and everyone got along very happily. Cody was one of 3 Taiwanese in the class, and since we came from the same country, and were close in age, therefore, we always had lots of common things to chat about. With that sense of intimacy, we naturally had gotten closer than most people. Cody was a little chubby and had a baby face. His personality was the same as his figure. He was very warm and kind-hearted, and he was always smiling. It just so happened that we both loved drinking wine. After drinking together a few times, we even started to share each other's secrets. He was very curious about my love life and asked a lot of questions. "Aren't you afraid?" I asked jokingly.
Why should I be afraid of? Do you think that you are the ghost from that movie? Who was hiding in the abandoned temple and waiting for the chance to suck off men's energy? Ha ha.
Cody laughed and continued to say,
Love is a personal choice. There is nothing to do with others.
During the Thanksgiving holiday, I skipped the delicious turkey dinner and went to Seattle to chew the fat with my old friend Phil. It turned out that the 2 lunatics came out with a crazy idea unexpectedly and took a Greyhound bus heading for San Francisco to chase the California sunshine. The long-distance bus trip lasted for more than 20 hours, and by the end of the ride, everyone was dizzy and couldn't tell the difference between east, west, north, and south. It seemed that California sunshine was really hard to get. Just by looking at the map of the United States, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The long coastline was more than 800 miles, and we passed through Washington State, Oregon, and California. Just like the Greyhound bus rolling, we turned inch by inch on the wheel, and finally, we arrived to San Francisco in the early morning the next day. We only had 2 days, therefore, we rushed around like sightseeing maniacs. We walked around Fisherman's Wharf, Golden Gate Bridge, Chinatown, Japantown, North Beach, etc. And later that night, we stayed at the home of Joy, our former classmate in Taipei, in Silicon Valley at South Bay. The South Bay's so-called Silicon Valley was indeed completely different from San Francisco. If San Francisco was a gorgeous lady, then Silicon Valley should be a well-dressed upper-class gentleman. The houses here were brand new and neatly built. The roads were smooth and wide, and green trees could be seen everywhere. It's obvious that this was a well-planned city. Although Silicon Valley was the mecca of the world's high-tech industry, it did not feel like an industrial city at all. Instead, it was more like a highly developed backyard city in San Francisco, where people lived. 2 days passed by just in a jiffy. With wandering hearts, we once again sat on the Greyhound bus for more than 20 hours, traveled through night and day, and when we returned to Seattle, we both were exhausted. But I did not stop there, just took a short break in Seattle. Soon I said goodbye to Phil and continued heading north. After the bus passed the US-Canada border, the sky gradually darkened. Sitting alone in the back row of the bus, I was not only physically exhausted but also mentally distraught. When the joy and laughter ended, the loneliness followed and gradually crept into my heart. Looking out of the bus's windows, there was endless darkness on both sides. Lights flickered, and the sky and the earth were blending together. Couldn't tell which was which. Traveling on the highway during this kind of cold night, I felt like I was back in Taiwan again. That winter, when I was traveling between Taipei to Taichung, back and forth every weekend, I often saw the bright lights along the highway like this. It's just that the sky and earth here seemed a little wider. I received a postcard from Jiajia in Taiwan. On the postcard, there were 2 teenage boys riding bicycles on a deserted green field in the fresh mist from the distance. A simple postcard stirred up my heart, and my thoughts couldn't help but go back so far away through the time tunnel. That seemed like a long time ago. Back in that time, we were arrogant and unruly. We used to have countless dreams and endless pursuits. So vivid from the memory, we lived the most fearless and contented lives. However, we could only possess youth once, and all the joys and sorrows we once had already have been trampled to pieces in our hasty footsteps and flown away. The youth has often been bitter, but inside that bitterness, there was so much hidden joy and pride. I was just like the dead branches outside the window of my room. No matter how prosperous the season was, all the leaves will fall off one day, and I would be dead. Yes, I was dead. I died in the cocoon of my own bitterness. What I could do was to leave the bitterness and paleness of youth behind, and then transform into a new me. I couldn't help but keep asking myself, is it time yet? At the end of the letter, Jiajia also attached a song for me. Bye-bye, my love. It's time to say goodbye. Don't let our youth last only for one time. Joys and sorrows. Taste of growing up. They are so precious, no need to hide. Don't let the separation grief wet our eyes. Much love in our hearts will never die. Please cherish them, They will accompany us through eternal time. Bye-bye, my love, just say goodbye. Don't let yesterday disappear from our sights. The dreams must be pretty. The path we walk on must be right. We would realize them together throughout our lives. The dreams must be pretty. The path we walk on must be right. We would realize them together throughout our lives. The last part of the lyric made me sleepless all night. Larry once said to me,
"This is a lonely city."
December was finally here, and there was no sign of snow at all. I thought, this city can really withstand loneliness. What was the feeling of loneliness between people? Was it gotten drunk? Were they tears? Or just the willfulness? A person's loneliness must be hidden and couldn't be seen or noticed by others. So, what about the loneliness between two people? That would be hurt, I assumed. I would rather be lonesome alone. Not let two lonely people entangle together and hurt each other eventually. It was a bone-crushing feeling of powerlessness. Life is inherently fragile. How could it withstand such deep-rooted pain? He asked.
Let's just have a fucking fall in love for once at least.
And I said, falling in love because of the loneliness, it's not love. I'm just a passerby. I'm afraid.
I am also a passerby in life.
He said.
So now we're even.
I am no longer young and cannot bear the pain of a broken heart.
You are pessimistic. You haven't even walked the road yet, and you first think about the pain in your feet.
I'm really scared.
What makes you think that I am not afraid?
During his work break, we wrapped in our heavy coats closely and smoked on the hospital front porch against the biting cold wind. Those conversations did not draw any conclusion for us. I did not know what to do and how to deal with his love. After his break time was up, he went back to the hospital, and I headed back to the dormitory across the street. When I returned upstairs back to my room, my heart felt heavier and heavier. I opened the window and let the December cold breeze flow into the room. I sat on the windowsill, wrapped myself inside my quilt, and stared blankly at the lights of the port in the distance, lighted a cigarette, and let my troubles disappear with the ashes of the burning cigarette. Just like that love, The night was bitingly cold, and not even the dim lights in the house could warm up my cold heart. All night long, I let a song that I had listened to thousands of times play repeatedly in the room.
寂寞是不易察觉的病痛，每每在无眠的夜里发作，你才知道，所有爱情留下的伤口，并没有被时光。
The soul-stirring saxophone sounds would really make people feel numb in their hearts, and every sound touched the dense old wounds and scars deeper into my heart.
由不得你想喝上一口，当你沉醉，需要可以依靠的温柔，才发觉自己一无所有。今夜的寂寞需要爱的麻醉。
How could we add new sorrows if the old wounds are not healed yet? At the moment of making the decision, I was lost. The saxophone sound was still swirling in the air, stubbornly trying to build a fortress with people's tears.
需要你来疏解。
As soon as December arrived, the Christmas atmosphere became intense. Colorful lights began to be hung all over the streets, department stores were crowded with shoppers, and Christmas songs were floating all over the air. The school was about to have a 2-week vacation, and I was thinking about how to spend my first Christmas in the Western country. Just when I thought about it, Cody's phone call was coming in time.
We planned to go skiing in the mountains on New Year's Eve. That was our way to welcome the new year. The Mexican gangs from the class planned to rent a cabin on the mountain. Anita and Shirley also said they were going to cook a big meal for everyone. And I heard that Thibaut and Rudolph were preparing a menu for them.
Cody sounded so excited on the other end of the phone. When I thought of the wood cabin under the snow, the moonlight, the shadow of candles, the feast, and this large group of good friends, what a romantic new year it would be. I just couldn't resist the romantics. By thinking about it, I also became so excited, but I forgot that I had never skied before. Oh well, who cares? Let's worry about it tomorrow. It's still a long time to come. Well, can I invite a friend? I kind of hesitate to ask Cody. Talking about skiing, Larry's image suddenly flashed through my head. Once I remembered that he mentioned something about skiing in his hometown to me.
Are you talking about that blue eye?
Right. Is it convenient?
Okay. Actually, we have already included him.
Cody quickly said it was okay 3 times. Larry had been out to dinner and danced with us several times a while ago, so everyone was familiar with him. With friends like Cody who have special friendships with me, of course, I have to share my troubles with him.
I am really telling you, don't be so stubborn. We all can tell that he is very nice to you.
Cody suddenly became serious again. No, I am not. I tried to defend myself. Of course, Cody couldn't understand my difficulty. In his mind, as long as two people loved each other, no matter whether it was marriage, residency, etc., it was not a problem. Cody didn't understand that we were not included in this game rule. Why didn't I want to walk into the garden of love? Why didn't I want to be with someone who loved me deeply? But I was not qualified for all of these right now. It didn't matter how much two people fell in love with each other. Even in such an open society like this, there was no way for me to get married and obtain citizenship. Under this objective condition of, when the time is up, you have to leave. If I could see the ending from the beginning, how could I dare to try it easily? I also understood Larry's heart, but he could not understand the difficulty of being a foreigner. There was no way that this country would allow me to stay just because we love each other. Besides, I didn't have the qualifications or any conditions to gamble with him. All I knew was that as long as you give, you have to be prepared to get hurt. And I was really scared of being hurt. During the evening, I decided to take a walk outside, enjoy the evening breeze, and sort out the chaos in my head. The wind was pretty strong on Canby Bridge, and the streetlights on both sides were turning on. I planned to walk to downtown from here. There was a kind of breathless desolation in Vancouver during the winter season. Sunshine rarely showed up, and most of the time, the sky was only piling with gray clouds, layers of clouds, and the only thing that accompanied the clouds were those tall, dry branches on the streets. Winter should be the season of rest, I thought. But were the rests to support us to take a longer journey in the future? On the street corner in the downtown, there was an old cathedral. When at dusk, there was always a dim yellow halo faintly revealed from the translucent stained window glass, accompanied by the singing of the choir intermittently, and the sound of the choir swinging in circles alone with the cold northern wind and floating back to the street. I was born for love. I would give my life for love. I was a fanatic about love, and I have always been an emotional wreck. I have never been able to treat myself well, and I have always been like a moth flying into a flame when it came to love. Was it a twist of fate, or a tragedy of life, and led me to float in the sea of affection involuntarily? I was like a devout pilgrim, stepping on the rhythm of the holy mountains, looking up at the glory of heaven, and walking step by step toward to my Mecca of love, prepared to use my life to burn through this winter. I won't make you any promises.
I do not care.
I can't ski.
You can learn it.
I was very careful about this relationship, couldn't give each other any pledge of eternal love. For us who were all passers-by, commitment was a kind of luxurious anesthesia. Today was the Friday the 13th, a bad luck day in the Western culture. But I actually was scheduled to take the TOEFL test today. Anyway, my English level wasn't so good and went to the exam on this bad luck day, which meant the double negative would turn into a positive. Maybe I could guess more of the questions correctly. Ha ha ha. When I finished the homework due for the class tomorrow, it was already 9 o'clock in the evening. I heard that someone was knocking on the door, and it turned out to be Thibaut, the French guy from class.
Let's go to the frog.
Thibaut's English had a very thick French accent, which was sometimes so difficult for me to understand.
There was somebody's birthday today.
Oh boy. He had to say it twice before I started to understand what he meant. Since I had just finished my homework, and when I heard that something fun, how could I miss it? I quickly turned around, grabbed my coat, and put on my sneakers. Although we still had class tomorrow, I followed Thibaut downstairs and went straight to Frog. Frog was a restaurant and bar by the beach that flaunted South American Latin flavor. 2 large torches stood in front of the door, burning the Latin fever all night long, especially during this kind of season. It also added a sense of romance to this bitter cold winter night. After entering the bar, the lights in the bar were dim. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized that almost everyone in the bar was familiar to me from school, and even the teacher Sandy was there. Today is Sandra's birthday, someone told me. Sandra and I were not in the same class, so I didn't know Sandra that well. Most of the time when we ran into each other in school, we just nodded and talked about the weather or other trivia things. Since today is her birthday, I should at least go over and say happy birthday to her. When I came back, I stopped by the bar, bought a glass of gin and tonic, and tried to find somewhere to sit down. As I was looking around, just in the far corner, there was another French guy from the class, Rudolph, who waved at me and indicated that there was an empty seat next to him. Rudolph and Thibaut were 2 French fellows in our class. Their personalities were totally opposite. Thibaut was very energetic and lively, sometimes acting like a child. On the other hand, Rudolph was quiet, mature, and sensitive. It just so happened that the 2 of them were inseparable best friends. I love talking to Rudolph and I love going out with Thibaut. Both of them are good friends of mine. The dance music was being played with great enthusiasm, and the drums were booming loudly against the smoggy and turbulent air. It seemed like the warm sun in the south after the thunderstorm. As time goes by, alcohol slowly takes effect on people's bodies. After everyone sang happy birthday loudly and raised glasses to celebrate the birthday of Sandra, a girl from the Côte d'Azur, those amigos took the lead to the dance floor. There was only a small dance floor in the bar, which couldn't accommodate a large group of people. Others were dancing and enjoying themselves in the aisles and by their tables. The music was just like the ocean tides from the Caribbean, swinging back and forth, drowning the crowd. The exciting music and cheerful rhythm made all the cells in the body lively and excited. I couldn't squeeze into the dance floor, so I leaned back in my chair, nodded my head with the rhythm, and drifted into the Caribbean dream. The warm sunshine, the blue ocean and sky, the white sandy beach, and the rows of palm trees are all swaying in front of my eyes like waves. Sandra was the birthday girl, of course. She would be pulled out to dance and have fun together. Looking at her glowing eyes and unsteady steps, I assumed she must already have too much to drink. Thibaut sat on the other side of the table from me and suddenly said,
Yeah, I'm telling you, Sandra a un secret crush on Rudolph.
Really? I was surprised and turned around to ask Rudolph, who sat next to me. Rudolph just grinned, spread out both arms, and gave me a "how do I know" expression.
Yes, she once told me herself.
Thibaut emphasized in a serious tone. Just as Thibaut said that, suddenly there was a commotion in the crowd from the dance floor. It turned out that Sandra drank too much and got too excited from dancing. She started to take off her clothes one by one. The crowd erupted in applause and whistles as if they were anticipating the night's climax. Under the encouragement of the crowd and music, Sandra jumped up on the table boldly, swayed her body, and looked at the applauding crowd, sometimes ogling and flirting, sometimes blowing kisses and flirting. I saw Sandra flaunting a sweater in her hand, imitating a stripper, and throwing it to the crowd under her feet, which elicited a burst of shouts and applause from the crowd. Enjoying this boiling atmosphere, I saw there was a satisfied smile on her face. "Hey, you are all the French fellows." When I saw what happened, immediately I yelled at Rudolph and Thibaut. I didn't want the drunk Sandra was going to do a stripper show in real here. Rudolph stood up in a sprint, grabbed the long coat hanging on the back of his chair, squeezed through the crowd, and asked Sandra to come down. Sandra was so drunk that she almost fell off the table several times. Rudolph stepped forward to grab her arm and tried to pull her down, which made Sandra fall down from the table like a cat into Rudolph's arms.
Stay away from me, get out of here.
Sandra was dissatisfied with someone interrupting her performance and struggled to push Rudolph away. Rudolph grabbed Sandra's arm firmly, lowered his head, and murmured a few words beside her ear. Only then did he see Sandra calm down, lowering her head like a little sheep, and let Rudolph put the coat on her. "I'll take her back home." Rudolph turned back and talked to Thibaut and me. Looking at Sandra's swaying footsteps and Rudolph supporting her back and walking out of the bar, I sat in my seat and my brain was blank for a few seconds. I wonder if this gorgeous night is over, or is it just the beginning of another one? No one seemed to be affected by the farce just now, and everyone started dancing to the music again. The excitement was still the same. After being disturbed by the ridiculous farce just now, I suddenly felt that my interest was all dull. I told Thibaut that I was going home, then I got up and left. As soon as I stepped out of the door, a chill suddenly hit my face, making me shiver. There were few pedestrians on the street, and occasionally a car roared past through, breaking the silence of the night. The pale street lights at midnight reflected the cold streets as if they were as gray as frost. Although it was cold and desolate outside, The blazing torches in front of the frog still burned with passion and tried to heat up this cold night. When I stood on the street, I could vaguely still hear the faint sound of drums from the bar. I thought, nights like this were perfect for cooling down the mood. Before Christmas came, our school organized several activities, but the thing that attracted me the most was the Christmas lights tour. The Western countries have a tradition during the Christmas season. Not only they would decorate a colorful Christmas tree at home, but they also hang a lot of colored lights outside their houses. Whenever the night fell, the world seemed to be covered with gorgeous, colorful clothes and shone with warmth on a cold winter night. Of course, not every household could afford to dress up their home in that luxury way. But in those rich residential areas, they often spent a lot of money decorating their homes. Therefore, these residential areas would become tourist destinations once a year. Our school used a designated bus to take students and drove around those rich residential areas on the cold winter night at the end of the year to catch up with that prosperity and fantasy one after another. Looking at those wealthy families who used small light bulbs of various colors to decorate their houses and courtyards into splendid fairy tale castles. Throughout the residential area, there was one house after another house. I was truly in an ocean of lights, instead of just watching from a distance. Walking into the glittering ocean of lights and dreamy fairy tale world made me almost forget that I just came from a dark world. This was not a dream, but I felt as satisfied as in a dream and didn't want to wake up for long. There was a saying, everything becomes beautiful when the amount is plenty. Now, I indeed believe it. In addition to lighting, there were also many houses that put elk and sleds on the roof and put snowmen and Santa Claus in the front yard. Each house had its own theme and built its own fantasy paradise. One family competed with the other. Maybe this was also a kind of vanity competition, I thought. The free Fantasy Paradise show was consistently on time every night during the cold winter until after the new year. This night was quite beautiful. Tonight, Vancouver was raining again. Cody came over to my dormitory with a bottle of red wine and said, "I am in a bad mood." So we drank wine and turned up the music really loud. Cody didn't say why he was feeling down, and I didn't bother to ask. My life was in such a mess already, so I was really helpless for Cody's emotions. Perhaps he was just lonesome, I thought. There really was no antidote to loneliness. Two foreigners were on this kind of night in a foreign land, and it happened to be a miserable rain in a foreign land again. No wonder that Cody was in a bad mood for no reason. The only reason to blame was the unpleasant cold rain on this miserable winter night. I thought the friendship from a good friend was probably what he needed most at this moment. Therefore, we drank, we joked, and we listened to a Taiwanese singer's "Make Me Happy, Let Me Worry." I was making silly jokes, and he was sitting on the floor next to the desk. His eyes were droopy and out of focus and giggling nonstop. In the end, we were both drunk. Today was Christmas Eve, Silent Night, Holy Night. Larry decorated a Christmas tree as tall as a man in the living room. The tree was put on all kinds of ornaments and wrapped with colorful lights. The Christmas tree was twinkling in the dark living room. Sometimes, it made me feel trance-like. In Western culture, Christmas is a day for family reunions. This year, he gave up his plan to return to his hometown and said he wanted to spend Christmas with me and let me experience an authentic Christmas. Therefore, he prepared everything ready, including trees, lights, gifts, and turkeys. He lit a blazing fire in the fireplace and poured a glass of red wine for me.
This year it's just the two of us. Next year we go back east for the holidays and the whole family comes back. That will be really fun.
He said it cheerfully. I was really afraid that he would say things like this, but since today was the holiday, I didn't want to spoil his joy, so I just let him do whatever he wished.
In my hometown, we always have lots of snow at this time of year, and everyone likes this kind of white Christmas. The snowing is the most festive atmosphere. There is nothing like this.
He rattled on, talking more and more enthusiastically. I was leaning on the couch originally, so I just simply lay down on the couch and used his legs as pillows.
When I was a kid, what I looked forward to the most was snowing on Christmas. There was one time, I used my cousin as a snowman model and wrapped him in layers of snow, almost suffocating him to death. Later that night, when my father came home and ended up that I was beaten almost to death. My mother's eggnog is the best around, and it's well known throughout the town.
It was a peaceful night, a warm night as well. I was accompanying him to relive his childhood memories through the endless stories. I suddenly realized that he turned out to be also a lonely person. This Christmas Eve, I felt very heartwarmed. The end of 1991. A large group of us, a total of 5 cars, went up to the mountain together, preparing to welcome the new year in a place closer to heaven. This year has passed in a daze, and the new year has followed vaguely like in a dream. When I thought about it, my heart felt so heavy. Where my future would go, I did not have any definite answer. I could only live in each of today and dared not plan for the distant tomorrow. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the person driving next to me. Could he be mine tomorrow? I was not sure at all. Whenever I thought about him treating me with such love and care, this unsustainable love caused a dull pain in my heart, like a razor blade slightly cutting through the skin. During the 2-hour drive, we held hands tightly, and I enveloped his love with my warm heart all the way. Although there were many dangerous icy roads and piles of snow along the roads, he was able to drive with one hand all the way. We pretended to be on the run from the chasing, again and again. We got through a daunting moment without mishaps. That made me feel like our life and death coexisted. The night on the mountain was indeed cold. I bundled up layer after layer of clothes as if I were wrapped inside a comforter, but I still felt freezing. Everyone laughed and said that I should have carried the stove on my back. Oh well, I came from a subtropical island, and my imagination of this kind of icy and snowy scenes was limited to what I could get from books and TV. My usual definition of coldness couldn't be separated from the cold rain on winter nights in Taipei. Speaking of the ice and snow world, this northern country was like the icy scenery from the postcards, and I walked into it myself in real. As soon as I stepped out of the cabin's door, all my eyes could see was white winter snow. My feet made a crunching sound when I walked on the snow. It was really interesting to me. The excitement in my heart was so strong when I saw this cold and snowy northern country scenery. Although everybody else was still in the rental cabin, trying to get settled and adjusted, I walked outside alone, sat in the rocking chair on the patio, lit up a cigarette, and gently exhaled the smoke. For a moment, I just simply stared at the snowy night scene in a daze. As if in a dream, I was really in this picturesque scenery. There was moonlight sprinkling on the ground, which reflected on the snow everywhere, rendering it into a dazzling phantom of white flowers. A house across the street, the colorful lights were still hanging on the trees in the front yard, just like the noise of the mundane world, which would never give up. Such snow, such ice, such color, and such mood, just merely thinking about it. The tingling feeling, just like the electric wave, went through my heart. So it turned out that the world could also have only a single color. Just like the heart of a newborn baby, it was so pure that it was not stained with a drop of dust, so holy that it was not touched by a drop of vulgarity. Then, all the sorrow and joy in the world weren't so important anymore. It seemed that the ever-pursuit, struggle, love, hate, anger, and obsession of the past could all fade away here. The heaven and earth surrounded me with only pure whiteness. This sense of holiness blessed me and made me again start to set off and fall, struggle, and chase in this mundane world. All of a sudden, this pure emotion made me feel want to cry. I did not notice when Larry quietly sat down beside me. "It's so beautiful," I admired and said softly.
The snow in my hometown is even more beautiful.
"The road is still long," I muttered.
What did you say?
He was confused. I laughed and got up. I grabbed a handful of snow on the ground and then threw it hard with all my strength. And I yelled, "The Earth is a round globe. Everything would be coming back." If you like my audiobook, please click like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.